In many ways, the anti-anthropocentric worldview of the contemporary American horror writer Thomas Ligotti can be summed up in the very last line of his short tale, Flowers of the Abyss, in which the story's narrator advises their audience to, quote, "Shutter your minds as well as you can to the abyss that is home to the madness of things," unquote. Certainly the abyss, in this sense, understood as the underlying nullity, incomprehensibility, and meaninglessness undergirding existence, is a prominent feature of Ligotti's oeuvre. Against the backdrop of the void, the human is rendered as negligible. Inspired by pessimistic, antinatalist philosophers such as Peter Zapfa and Emile Cioran, as well as modern psychological terror management theory grounded in the work of Ernest Becker, Ligotti maintains that humans, unlike other beings, are cursed in their unique possession of consciousness, haunted as we are in the awareness and fear of our own eventual demise, of the dark drape of nothingness that descends upon the taking of our last breath. And up until the time that we draw our last breath, we can expect nothing but existential pain and suffering, punctuated with brief attempts at escape. Thus, we go to extraordinary lengths to suppress and forget the fact of the matter that we are little more than, in Ligotti's words, quote, "hunks of spoiling flesh on disintegrating bones," unquote. Although in the religious vein, the worlds depicted in Ligotti's short stories are devoid of anything smacking of traditional theism, they have a pronounced theological tenor nonetheless. And characterizing Ligotti's work is grounded in, quote, "a discourse born of the void," unquote, Brad Baumgartner provocatively argues that Ligotti's short stories posit an apophatic mysticism, a purgative contemplation, reminiscent of that exemplified in the writings of the great medieval Christian mystics such as Meister Eckhart and St. John of the Cross. While I agree that a kind of via negativa is certainly at play in Ligotti's work, we cannot forget that the abyss is described in our opening quote as home to the madness of things. And for Ligotti, it is the something rather than the nothing that is ultimately more unsettling to the mind. Why should there be something rather than nothing, he asks in his essay, Who Goes There?, published in the collection of his more philosophical writings, Conspiracy Against the Human Race. The nothing is simply beyond what we can know, while the something is immediately before us and invites a host of unanswerable questions. Thus, Ligotti explains, and I have the quote here, right? "Everyday objects seem curiously liable to being perceived as uncanny because we see them every day and know how they should be and should not be. One day, those shoes on the floor of your clothes closet may attract your eye in a way that they never have before. Somehow they have become abstracted from your world, appearances you cannot place, lumps of matter without a fixed quality and meaning. You feel confused as you stare at them. What are they? What is their nature? Why should there be something rather than nothing? And what if you should look at yourself, the most everyday object there is, and feel at a loss to attach a quality and meaning to what is being seen or what is seeing it? What now, indeed? Thus, for Ligotti, it's the something that evokes true dread and fear when considered in any way but the most superficial manner. Things naturally induce madness, with the human itself appearing as the thinginess of them all. A deeply menacing, seething aliveness, an occult animism disorienting to both characters and readers, courses through Ligotti's work as all manner of human and non-human things and beings take on lives of their own. A leveling of hierarchy and distinctiveness between the human and the non-human is fundamental to the Ligottian universe. Ligotti's human characters must contend with the terror that things in the world each possess their own incomprehensible purposes, agencies, and deliriums. Strange transformations between the human and non-human, the animate and inanimate, regularly occur in his stories. While human characters undergo disturbing metamorphoses that render them lifeless, simultaneously, a whole host of artifacts, from puppets and manikins to houses and music boxes, spring to life as small gods, daimonic agents whose unholy intents remain opaque, and whose revelatory appearances collapse normative distinctions between animacy and inanimacy, self and other. I argue that Ligotti's fiction serves as a case study for exploring ontologies of agency and the unseen and unknowable relationships between persons, both animate and inanimate, that permeate the cosmos. Especially pertinent to my paper are ideas drawn from new animism and new materialism as formulated in the work of religion scholar Graham Harvey and philosopher Timothy Morton, both of whom advocate a turn to a revitalized animism. I will then analyze passages drawn from a selection of Ligotti's short stories, especially his tale, Dr. Volk and Mr. Veitch, as well as The Dream of a Mannequin, and a smattering of other tales. Acknowledging Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft as significant literary influences, Thomas Ligotti is critically recognized as a master of weird cosmic horror, a genre that expresses fears that defy our rational intellect in terms of their vastness and monstrosity. And who amongst us can deny that we live in a weird, frightening, and monstrous age? Wars, genocides, pandemics, the rise of political authoritarianisms, threats of nuclear annihilation, the emergence of AI, and human-induced climate change are just a few of the many terrors we currently see and fear. Philosopher Timothy Morton has described such threats as Cthulhu-like, inhabiting our 21st century imaginaries as monsters. The tragic paradox at the heart of the Anthropocene, if this is even the term that we want to wield at this point, is a sort of pseudo-geological term, since there are other designations, including Donna Haraway's Cthulhucene, are worthy competitors. But we're faced as humans with an altered planet through the use of the burning of fossil fuels, and we are facing profound, terrifying realizations that planetary processes outside our control and barely within the bounds of our current understanding are threatening human survival. It is within the context of existential threat that philosophers, religion scholars, and cultural theorists over the past 30 years have called for new ways of deprioritizing the human and setting into less hierarchically inflected relationships with various non-human others, including animals, plants, as well as natural and human-made artifacts. Fundamental to many of these paradigms, variously known as new materialism, new vitalism, new animism, object-oriented ontology, is the premise that non-human others have their own autonomous agents, their own autonomy, agency, and ontologies that are completely separate from and mysterious to those of the human. They appear as the strange stranger, to borrow a turn of phrase from Morton in this regard. It's the understanding that modern attempts to parse beings and things into distinct, knowable categories, such as culture versus nature, animacy versus inanimacy, plant, animal, mineral, all the way down the line and so forth, not only have little bearing on the direct experience of the world, for experience always blurs and complicates these neat categories, but is also the source of their commodification and destruction in late-stage capitalism. Religion scholar Graham Harvey has long advocated for a new animism in this regard, in contrast to the spirit-filled old animism of 19th century writings, such as those produced by Edward Tyler, as one example, in his 1871 work, Primitive Culture, Harvey attempts to rehabilitate and reconceptualize the term as premised in the understanding, quote, that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human, and that life is always lived in relationship to others, unquote. Reminiscent of Bruno Latour's contention, we've never been modern, Harvey maintains that we've always been animist. Indeed, as Stuart Guthrie argues in his book, Faces in the Clouds, A New Theory of Religion, even the most modern, non-mystical amongst us regularly sees non-living things as alive. As he notes, we often will take flying debris as birds or describe a stuck drawer as stubborn. While many proponents of this approach, including Harvey and Timothy Morton, consider it critical to fostering an ethics of relational care and compassion, such ethical concerns are absent in the Ligottian hell realms, as relationships are grounded in capacities for senseless and unspeakable cruelty. In a world without salvation or ultimate references to the good, any person, human or non-human, can exercise demiurgic power in subjugating and terrifying the other. Such is the case in Ligotti's tale, Dr. Volk and Mr. Veitch, contained in the collection Songs of a Dead Dreamer. Here, the unfortunate Mr. Veitch visits the evil doctor's loft, which is described as, quote, a cross between a playroom and a place of torture, unquote. Filled as it is with mangled, life-size dolls with lost limbs suspended from the ceiling with wires. It's here that Veitch is introduced to the most terrible and alluring of Volk's many artifacts, a life-size wooden dummy called Ticket Man. As Veitch approaches the strange figure for the first time, he is startled to find that, quote, several things occur in succession. The dummy casually lifts its head and opens its eyes. It reaches out and places its wooden hand on Veitch's hand of flesh, and its jaw drops open to dispense a mechanical laugh. Ya, ha, 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 ha. Ya, ha, 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 unquote. All the while, as this figure continues its unnatural cackles, it gazes blankly into the void. Dr. Volk explains the significance of the Ticket Man. And we're finally moving to a new slide. Okay. And so this is what Dr. Volk explains to Mr. Veitch. Think of it, wood waking up. I can't put it any clearer than that. And let's not forget about the painted hair and lips, the glassy eyes. These two are aroused from a sleep that should never have been broken. These two are part of a tingling network of dummy nerves, alive and aware in a way that we cannot begin to imagine. There is something too painful for tears, and so the dummy laughs in your face, trying to give vent to a horror that was no part of his old home of wood and glass and paint. But this horror is the very essence of its new home, our world. In this passage, Dr. Volk perfectly summarizes Ligotti's anti-natalist premise that it's far better to have never existed than to have come into the world. What the Ticket Man acquires in gaining some kind of consciousness is an awareness of the nightmare that existence entails. Meanwhile, over the course of the story, Mr. Veitch, as well as his associates, Prina and Lamb, who are engaged in a kind of love tryst, it's very vague in the story, that Veitch seeks Volk's aid to break, undergo their own strange metamorphoses. The first occurs to Prina and Lamb as the three stroll down the street of Wavering Peaks. One moment Veitch is with his companions, and the next, quote, it is as if they are two puppets who have been whisked upwards on invisible strings into the fog and out of sight, unquote. The transformation becomes even more grotesque as their bodies appear tangled into a monstrous heap. And again, a quote from that story. Two went up, but only one comes down, a single form suspended at arm's length above the stone-paved street and twisting a bit. as if at the end of a hangman's rope. Veitch uncovers his eyes and looks at the thing. Yes, there is only one, but this one has too many. There is too much of everything on the body, two faces sharing a single head, two mouths fallen silent forever with parted lips. The sight sets Veitch into his own spiral of madness, as Vogt later finds him cackling with Ticketman, so they're both laughing together at the end of the story. Veitch himself is transformed into an automaton through Vogt's occult powers. For, quote, Veitch's body begins to rise in a puppet's hunch, then soars up into the tenebrous rafters and beyond, transported by unseen wires. His arms and legs twitch uncontrollably during the elevation, and his screams fade. Vogt then falls from his staircase into the abyss, as the story concludes with Ticketman remaining in the abandoned loft, very much alone and alive, with eyeballs rolling around in his wooden painted head. In the end, the reader is left with the impression that the Ticketman may have been the orchestrator of it all. The Ticketman and his human counterparts present just one example of the wide assortment of puppets, clowns, and mannequins populating Ligotti stories. In the quite intricate, nested tale Dream of a Mannequin, the narrator, a psychiatrist recounting the dreams of their client, is horrified to later discover his client, or their client, Amy Locker, as she's named in the story, in the likeness of a mannequin in a fashion shop window. Or at least the narrator thinks they have seen Ms. Locker, for they admit that it may have been a trick of the eye before a thunder shower forced the narrator to scurry away from the shop window. But no matter, for that glimpse was just enough to fuel the narrator's now recurring nightmares of entering a brightly lit room full of things that, quote, things that look like people dressed as dolls, or else dolls made up to look like people, unquote. The unnamed narrator continues, and this is one of my last long quotes. Quote, I remember being confused about which it was. And they are lying up and down the floor at the top of the stairway and even upon the stairs themselves as they disappear into the darker regions below. When I emerge from the bedroom, I see their eyes shining in the white darkness, and their heads are turned in all directions, paralyzed, yes, with terror. I merely return a fixed gaze, wondering if my eyes are shining the same as theirs. Then one of the doll people, slouching against the wall on my left, turns its head haltingly upon a still little neck and looks straight at me. And that's the end of the quote. The dread then deepens when the single doll person speaks and beckons to the narrator, quote, become as we are, sweetie, die into us, unquote. Like so many of Ligotti's characters, the psychiatrist, conventionally considered a person of science, cannot escape the lunacy into which they have now descended. I'm going to skip this next section where I mentioned the last feast of Harlequin very briefly. It's not just that clowns or puppets or dolls who exert their menacing powers, but pretty much any object in our environment is capable of these kinds of dark revelations. In the story that I referenced in the beginning, quote, the title Flowers of the Abyss, it's a peculiar house which was the scene of the violent deaths of its former inhabitants, the Van Livan family. And the house has since fallen into despair, and the strange vegetation growing in its garden that leads to derangement. Again, the unnamed narrator visits its new occupant, who had taken up residence in the place after the family's deaths, and is shown a music box that tinkles out a sinister tune, a tune that is the madness of things. It's suggested that this music box with its unnatural tunes was the nexus, somehow it was the originator of the violence that broke out in which the families slew one another, okay? In conclusion, and we'll end with puppeteer. We are as a species, alien forms, dropped into an uncomprehending and incomprehensible universe, the true horror of which human reason and rationality and the shiny post-Enlightenment regimes they engender prove no match. Ligotti's work is so visceral and searing because it taps into the very same vein of existential terror we currently inhabit. Triumphalist narratives of human progress and dominion over the non-human worlds have shattered. We find ourselves as aliens on a hostile planet, and we find that the objects and beings around us seem to be morphing in terrible ways. We are being forced to recalibrate and re-envision our relationships with other than human persons and intelligences, including now with AI, right? On a more personal level, who amongst us doesn't walk through this life with unspeakable traumas and senses of alienation? I'd like to end with a reference to Ligotti's essay, The Consolations of Horror, in which he maintains that the key reason for opening his stories is to discover, quote, simply that someone shares some of your feelings and has made of these a work of art, which you have the insight, sensitivity, and like it or not, peculiar set of experiences to appreciate, unquote. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
If you look right over there. Are you looking? Technical or let you see. Did you say you can see it? It's I can't tell you, son. If you can't see it, then you just never know it.